one of the biggest things that's going to tank your reputation, and there are a lot, but it is sending to non-hand raisers, right? That's going to result in spam complaint rates. That is a biggie. That's going to affect your reputation. Some other simple things is this happens a lot with marketers that aren't very consistent, or maybe someone's acquired a company or a brand, and the email address is just kind of sat on a shelf for a while, right? So therefore, we're going to have increased numbers of hard bounces or undeliverable emails, or maybe even some of those email addresses that are on that file are so old that they've been converted into spam traps, a severely negative signal. The other one I think I touched on before is really like it's just complexity of their systems because they have, all those say four different things and all, different tools, whether it's help desk or whatever. A lot of times they just don't talk to each other particularly well. And one of those streams can be a weak link, might not be authenticated properly, might be, you know, heaven forbid, sending, activate your account list to all of your inactive subscribers or your opt-outs. Sort of bad data in is kind of big. So complexity and natural or inherent risk in their program is two of the biggest.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Super excited to have Scott Hardigree on, who is the CEO and founder of Email Industries. And it seems like every year people say this is the end of email. Email is dead, and every year they're wrong. So we'll start, Scott, with your origin story. Sort of what caused you to found Email Industries and what the catalyst was there. And then we'll dive into, what makes this year a little bit different from a deliverability challenge perspective.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity. Let's see, origin story. The company was founded in 2008, and we're getting ready to celebrate our 16th anniversary on St. Patrick's Day. I founded the company after my brother and I. I guess I should say I've spent a lifetime in email. My very first job in college I was an email designer. I didn't know there was such a thing. And then went on to found a digital marketing agency. This was in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was great. We did a lot of email-centric work. It was really email design and coding, and we started to incrementally started picking up strategy work because we were learning a lot from our clients. I founded a company with my brother. After we exited that in 2007, shortly thereafter, I founded Email Industries. And we started as a full service but dedicated email marketing agency. We were only one of two at the time. But as the business sort of developed and grew, I think it just sort of aligned more with my interests. And that was, from a youthful creative person into design and all that, I think I turned into more of a analytical. So we initially were doing a fair amount of email deliverability projects, just consulting, and that we were just better at that. And that bit of business began to grow for us. And along the way, we developed two products. First was a product that's used by email service providers to vet their senders. So it kind of gives like a list, a sniff test. Directly behind that, we created Alfred at alfred.email, which is a brand-facing list hygiene product. And still to this day, a large chunk of our business and clients are around email deliverability services. So as of 2024, we have just under 20 employees, most of which are here in the US. We have a couple of folks in Europe, one in Egypt. And because I think we're so nichey around deliverability consulting and services and deliverability related products, we get to work with for a small company, some really incredible brands because, we're hyper specialized.
Cool. Well, that's a great origin story. Want to get into first hygiene. It used to be back in the day that when you could actually tell if an email was open before stuff was cached and proxied, you could use that as one of your potential, ways to clear dead wood out of a file, right? That was sort of the prevailing wisdom. There was some argument then it as to whether or not you should in fact clear out the dead wood or not, and sort of it wasn't a consensus, but a lot of folks did used to think like, oh well, I should, if I haven't gotten engagement with, at least from an open rate perspective, I should clean that out. And then obviously it sort of moved to, okay, well, since we can't tell open, we can still track clicks. And so if we can still track clicks, then we can use that as a hygiene metric. So where are we now with regards to best practices on list hygiene and as it relates to deliverability?
Yeah. I mean, list hygiene. I mean, so it runs the spectrum from hygiening your own file
Right.
to for customers that need it using third-party services. Your own data is always sort of the source of truth. And
Right.
you're right. Open rates have been a vanity metric, even more so now for B2B senders. But if you can look at overall activity, open rates, click rates, reply rates, if you're an e-commerce brand, you can look it's been purchase or on-site activity. Those are great ways to figure out should you hygiene your list or not. Um, Most customers kind of come to that decision, and rightfully so, is that you don't really need to hygiene unless you see a dip in some metric. Usually it's revenue or it is those vanity open metrics or click rates, because that's indicative of, oh, I have too much deadwood, as you say, on my list, and we need to prune that. Because mailbox providers have, spam filtering and whether through third-party filters or mailbox providers has really changed. When you and I got started in the business, it was about, you couldn't include the word Rolex or use all caps in an email. It was content filtering. And now it's largely about reputation associated with the domain name, the IP address of the service that's sending out the email, and a whole host of factors. So now that we've got it's moved away from content and back over into engagement, we are seeing increasing cases where hygiene has become, whether you do it internally or using a third party, has become more critical in the success of making sure the email gets to the inbox.
Right. Right. So, um, are there ways to sort of reactivate the dead wood before you throw it away?
Totally. Definitely look back at those signals, right? It really depends on, well, a whole host of factors. How long a sales cycle might be. Does a customer sort of age out of whatever the product or offering might be? But yeah, we'll often recommend reactivation and re-engagement campaigns to that deadwood. And just so that clients, it's hard won. Customer acquisition is expensive. You want to do it wisely, meaning you don't necessarily want to put these people in the normal workflow. And if you are going to do some form of re-engagement, you kind of start slow and test and really keep your eye on your deliverability metrics, right? Just to make sure that it's not, we're not sending massive amounts of negative signals back, spam complaints but of course, too, you want to craft a pretty unique message and whenever possible, offer more value than you might normally.
That's great advice. This year, a couple of major inbox providers implemented more stringent compliance requirements with regards to, DNS related entries in particular, but just making sure that it's an authenticated sender for a domain. Do you feel like everyone saw that coming and sort of had their ducks in a row, or has that been like a big wave of all of a sudden seeing their KPIs drop and being like, what caused this? Or maybe they drop for as when they're sending from a particular platform, but not from every one of their platforms. Sort of how has the industry reacted to those changes?
Yeah, well, it varies. Like our clients were all prepared
Right.
because
You
and it
told them what
depends
was
on,
coming.
yeah, and it's been a best practice for quite a long time, and we all just assumed that there would be some sort of enforcement that would happen. It really depends too on the email service provider or CRM or marketing automation tool that they use. Some were very strict early on. When we
Mhm.
onboard you, we're going to set up these. DMARK is the big one,
Yeah.
and saying we're going to make sure that you have at least some DMARC policy in place. Um, there are other email service providers or marketing automation platforms that really didn't mandate this. So there's been quite a bit of work that we've done to help prepare these clients. But there's kind of two things to keep in mind. One is that this happened with both Google. Currently, it's just like their gmail.com addresses, so the consumer addresses, not Google Workspace. And then at the same time, Yahoo slash AOL had a lot of the same requirements, and they're fairly tightly aligned. But neither one is really doing any real enforcement until April. And right now, the bar is pretty low, talking about the DMARC. And that is, you can set it up with three different policies. The easiest one, it doesn't really do anything for you, but it helps brands stick their toe in the pond, is you set it up to P equals none. Again, doesn't do a lot, but you know, uh, but we've learned since this time that we're really trying to get clients now while we're at it and we're setting up that DMARC policy. Let's go ahead and get you to a stricter enforcement policy because again, we have learned that it's coming. The enforcement, the recommendation is going to come, and then the enforcement will ultimately come. And for brands that don't know, this is incredibly important. It used to be the biggest threat for a user of an email address was you get spam. And what's happened now is the proliferation of phishing attempts, right? And brands that don't have the correct DMARC policy in place and making sure all their authentication is aligned, their domain can be spoofed. And there's all sorts of other things like lookalike domains. So, if someone had left the back door open to their DMARC policy, and this unfortunately happens to a percentage of our clients, is that an outfit, oftentimes from Asia, has been sending spam off of their domain and drafting off of their good reputation. So therefore, our client's brand reputation takes a pretty steep dive. So it's not that Google's being mean to marketers or trying to put more work on them. It's just that the threat landscape has changed so much away from just spam. They've got that pretty well dialed in. And now it's more about these other threats.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Obviously you can have the external bad actors, jeopardizing deliverability. But I'm wondering how common, because I've seen what I think is the byproduct of this in the past, where you actually have sort of one potentially fairly junior internal person at an organization that ends up thinking they're doing the right thing because they want to get a message out to a bunch of folks, and so they inadvertently spam, and it creates a ripple effect for deliverability across the entire domain. How often do you see that happening?
Oh, yeah, human error. I mean, sometimes there's just fundamental errors, right?
Yeah.
Like a business that may have been built off of cold email and it's going to have its inherent challenges. But yeah, human error plays a pretty big part. And it tends to be one individual. And I think you said ripple effect. That is
Yeah.
probably the right word because deliverability is all about compounding factors, right? So, like, yeah, that's a big one. Maybe there were two or three other things, like maybe the list should have been hygiene and maybe the authentication wasn't set up perfectly.
Yeah.
But this was the straw that broke the camel's back. And rebuilding reputation takes time and nuance
Hmm.
to fix. So it's an unfortunate reality that we as humans are fallible.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the Did It brand, we happen to use Barracuda, but for Giving Forward and Truth Nutrition and the EMA, we're all just on the Google stack. And one fascinating thing about Barracuda, which can be set to all different levels of filtering, right, is you can literally see the score, right, and the components of the score. And so your discussion of sort of that ripple effect or that final straw that broke the camel back is easiest to see in a Barracuda style environment. But when you're in the Google or Yahoo or other inbox provider environment, the they're not as transparent about what the straw was, right? And so
No.
that's why you have a job, basically, is because the black box basically says something bad happened and your deliverability score goes way down, right? And so now it's up to you to do the forensic analysis and figure out, like, okay, not only what was the straw that broke the camel's back, but what were the other compounding factors, right? Because there might have been some others that just were there and also need to be remediated at the same time.
That's right. Yeah, while you're under the hood. And,
Yeah.
and even a more case than that is, these really large brands, it's very difficult to get visibility into your deliverability.
Mm,
Um, Big brands, smart people come to us and go, here's a collection of anecdotal information. The CEO's wife's email didn't make it. KPIs are down for a certain department.
right.
And that seems suspicious because we haven't really done anything. Or maybe the intern, sort of made a mistake. So
Yeah.
that's really step one. Like
Yeah.
it's very difficult to get visibility, but step one is figuring out like who you as a brand or mailer, like who are you struggling with? Is it, like you said, is it Barracuda? Is it Proofpoint? If it's more on the B2B side, Yahoo, Google, of course, Microsoft and their products. So you kind of have to benchmark like where we are, where do we think we were, then the forensic analysis of how did we get here, then of course remediating it, and then ultimately putting up guardrails,
Right.
based on their practices to say, um, you know, you're sort of on the radar now. We're good now,
Mm.
but we might want to have a heightened sensitivity because certain risk factors in your business, complex systems is one of the biggest ones. All sorts of
Right.
mail coming from all sorts of places.
So you've probably had a chance to look at hundreds, maybe thousands of situations where deliverability became an issue, or at least they thought deliverability became an issue. And so you came in as a SWAT team to sort of look to see what can you fix. Are there sort of common threads that you see across sort of the problem areas that just pop up over and over again? And so maybe some 101 level stuff that people should go in and as a result of watching or listening this, like, oh, I should have my tech team take a look at this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest, and this happens a lot with B2B and on the SaaS side of things, is that they'll have multiple mail streams. They'll have, of course, their one-to-one communications, say using Google Workspace, Marketo sending out marketing emails, SendGrid sending out transactional emails from their application. But they'll have a sales team, BDRs and SDRs that may be using a sales enablement tool. And it's a blended audience, meaning that it could be third-party data, it could
Mm,
be zero-party data. Um, One of the biggest things that's going to tank your reputation, and there are a lot, but it is sending to non-hand raisers, right? That's going to result in spam complaint rates. That is a biggie. That's going to affect your reputation. Some other simple things is this happens a lot with marketers that aren't very consistent, or maybe someone's acquired a company or a brand, and the email address is just kind of sat on a shelf for a while, right? So therefore, we're going to have increased numbers of hard bounces or undeliverable emails, or maybe even some of those email addresses that are on that file are so old that they've been converted into spam traps, a severely negative signal. The other one I think I touched on before is really like it's just complexity of their systems, because they have, all those say four different things and all, different tools, whether it's help desk or whatever. A lot of times they just don't talk to each other particularly well. And one of those streams can be a weak link, might not be authenticated properly, might be, you know, heaven forbid, sending, activate your account list to all of your inactive subscribers or your opt-outs. Sort of bad data in is kind of big. So complexity and natural or inherent risk in their program is two of the biggest.
Right. Yeah, that leads me to a follow-up question relating to something that seems like it would actually be pretty difficult to do as you layer in complexity and sends going out from different places, which is dealing with unification of unsubscribe requests, right? And the difference between transactional unsubscribes and marketing unsubscribes, to the extent that you have these two reasons to communicate with somebody's email address. It seems like that's an area that I don't know that anybody's like really cracked particularly well, because depending on your mix of sending locations and the way in which each of them handle unsubscribes, they may not even have an API that can talk to other systems and say, oh, by the way, I just saw somebody who decided they don't want to hear from you anymore, right? If
Yep.
that doesn't percolate through your system and then something else goes out from somewhere else, you have a very irate person, and that would seem like a trouble spot.
Totally. For customers that you tend to use like a single platform, it's much easier. Say
Yeah,
you use HubSpot for marketing and CRM.
yeah.
But yeah, for that client we just mentioned that's using three different tools, they have to build something
Mhm.
and they have to integrate it and they have to test it and make sure it works. Funny you say that. We have a fun kind of like product roadmap over here and things that we think about building.
Right.
And a universal sort of unaffiliated master unsubscribe service is there's a need for it
For sure.
for a certain size marketer,
Yeah.
just because it's very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess on the positive side, one of the advantages of AI now is that integrating things that have APIs is a lot faster than it used to be, because obviously the AI reads the API. The AI can read the API documentation and make a coder much more efficient in actually building something like that, whether it's in-house or outside. So
It's
I do hope
amazing.
that
Yeah.
that we do start to see some services like that, or just ease of integration, where things might have been particularly challenging before.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily require serious development resources to make that happen.
Right, right.
Yep. Yep. And of course, there's all sorts of no code app builders now too, which
Yep.
are pretty attractive. And not to mention
So
just like a Zapier.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Although I think a lot of the stuff that you used to need Zapier for, now it's a lot easier to go direct with. So,
That's
uh,
it. Yep.
and I'm glad I'm not an investor in
Eh,
Zapier.
You read my thoughts.
Um, so what are the other challenges I think marketers face, and emailers as well, that are, or in-house emailers, is the how tightly to make your segment, right? Like, because with AI, you may be able to get down to one-to-one segments, right? Where you're literally hyper personalizing people's email addresses to a level never before imagined. On the flip side, there's still a whole bunch of people who are like batch and blast.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
okay, everybody gets the same thing. Doesn't matter how long I've known you, doesn't matter what your level of engagement, it doesn't matter, your geography, etc. And then there's all the levels in between, which is, coming up with common groups that may have a similar level of where they are in the buy cycle for B2B, or, where they are in your sort of lifetime customer value perspective from a
Hmm.
B2C marketer. or how frequently they order from you, et cetera. So how is that changing? And that obviously doesn't directly impact deliverability, but it indirectly impacts deliverability because if you are just still using a batch and blast, everybody gets the same thing. You're not delighting the recipient in the same way that you might otherwise.
Right. No, I would say it directly impacts deliverability.
Okay.
Because of that shift going
Yeah.
from, say, content filtering or just IP reputation, looking at engagement, and Google is so good at their filtering, you know, they don't look at it just on a domain name from, say, an e-com brand or direct to consumer brand. They'll look at it and be like, this person is highly engaged with them, right? We're going to make sure that they really interact with these emails, and don't block it. Maybe there's another segment of people that aren't so engaged, and they'll say, all right, we might test sending some of these to the spam folder and see how people react to it. They run these great experiments at all times. But just overall, I'm both sort of impressed and underwhelmed what a lot of brands do, whether on the consumer or the business side.
Hmm.
A lot of like, new generation email service providers, Iterable, Braze, Cordial, they have super great workflows, like recipes, right? You come like Klaviyo too, right? Where you can just pop people right into a flow, particularly for direct to consumers. So that's super impressive, and a lot of customers are taking advantage of that. But there's this huge, overwhelmingly large, in my mind, of people that just do batch and blast um, emails. I guess they think it's like the juice isn't worth the squeeze, or
Mm.
they oftentimes just don't have the data. Certain brands have way more leverage than others, direct to consumer with on-site behavioral purchase data. You can do a lot of cooler things. For example, direct to consumer cart abandonment emails have gotten really sophisticated. It used to be that, you just say, oh, here's this hoodie, and you still want to buy it. And now it can really, like, it used to just kind of pop in an image, right? And now it can be like, here's this hoodie, here's the description, here's your size. It's 32 degrees in Boston right now. It's probably a great time to buy this thing, right? Um, and those can be plug and play. I mean, just integrate a couple of systems, or maybe it's native. So it's a spectrum, but it's definitely getting better.
Absolutely. Do you feel our best practices from an external data append perspective to create segments, right? Because you may have a file where you don't have a ton of information on them, but you can use either via a clean room or direct, from like an Experian or somebody like that. You can learn a whole lot more about individuals. I mean, probably Experian probably can guess the color of my underwear, even if I have no idea what color it is, as they did have everything on me, right? And
That's right.
so from that perspective, have you seen email marketers do a great job using that third-party data to create the segments that speak differently to their different audiences?
Yeah, it might be just our audience or our prototypical customers, but we haven't seen a large use of that data.
Mm.
On the direct mail side, back when I was in that business, oh yeah, right. So because most of them are kind of first party and they do have some indication or some inferred information.
Yeah,
So on the consumer side, I haven't seen, well, any or in recent years leveraging that type of data for email. On the business side, yeah, that can provide some visibility into folks, whether they can capture them on the site and be like, oh, this person's kind of C-level, or, they clicked on these two or three things, but oh, the company is, fits this ICP. So we're going to send them different sorts of messaging that they might not know. And you can obviously do that in a programmatic fashion, which we have seen lift for work with a kind of a well-known sales trainer, big name on YouTube, and they've implemented some of that to people that sign up for their courses and send them down different paths, and that was definitely successful. but it's test worthy, like anything else. There's, especially on the B2B side, there's always the challenge of reliability. Some of this information is inferred, some of it is firsthand knowledge, um, because, B2B titles, there's a lot of churn, and as opposed to consumer, right? Um, but no, I would love to actually see some use cases for appending sort of firmographic or demographic information to consumer mail.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned direct mail, right? I sort of inadvertently did it into the direct mail business. My former business partner got us into it, and I invented some QR code technology that puts custom QR codes on every piece of mail so that it pings the CRM when the QR code gets scanned. But I sort of think through like which channels of marketing still allow sort of one-to-one level communication. And email is clearly one, direct mail is another, with the ability to append information on. And then within the broader digital ecosystem, we're actually losing some resolution of targeting within the programmatic ecosystem because third-party cookies are, already gone out of Safari and Firefox, and they're disappearing in Chrome, as we speak. And so to some extent, I think email maybe becomes even more important as a first-party permission relationship where you have a direct connection to that B2B buyer or that consumer.
Mm-hmm.
So the other interesting thing is I don't know whether or not it's being as heavily used as it could, but there's still some places where you can use, hashed emails as a targeting variable and remain sort of create an anonymity. I don't know if that bridges into areas that you sort of keep track of as well, to sort of retain the ability to have one-to-one communications, or let's say groups, custom audiences, created via the hashed emails. Have you found that's continued to keep the interest in email data collection really high?
Um, somewhat, somewhat. Yeah, it really depends on the brand. But you said something when we first started, and this is a slight pivot, is that you said, people talk about the demise of email for years. And as it ties into what you're talking about, cookies and sort of their current state, and you may be able to see that art print behind me. It says email always and forever. I sort of believe that, not just because the name of the company is Email Industries and we would have to
Right.
do a major rebrand, but imagine if email would have been created today. One of the FANG companies, right, were to create it. It's open source. It is the last sort of, maybe direct mail too, right? But it is the last sort of bastion of digital that you own, right? No one, it's up to you whether you succeed or fail in it. It's an open protocol. It doesn't actually cost anything. You can do it all manually if you really wanted to.
Mhm.
Um, so the importance of email is, a matter of fact, last year we acquired Inbox Expo, an event. We're having our first one in the States in Atlanta in May, but the keynote is entitled "Leadership in the Golden Age of Email," because as privacy laws, of course, it typically starts in Europe and California, and it ultimately affects everybody else. Is that email still is the one channel that it is like truly sort of owned, media, for lack of a better word. So we, instead of going through those cycles of email's demise, I think it is really once again on the rise.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear what other topics you guys added to the agenda for that, because obviously, given the resurgence and the importance of email and having events around it, there's a huge industry, that relies on it, both in-house people, agency people, providers, et cetera. So I'm curious sort of what things rose up to the level of importance where you guys decided to add it to the agenda.
Yeah. Well, we were just overwhelmed with like speaker responses. And our goal was to lean more toward brand side speakers rather than sort of industry experts. And we were very pleased. Wonderful brands from, Air France, and we have Chipotle is on our content committee. And so it's a super wide variety. Deliverability now is a hot topic. So not only do we have a standalone session around some of this DMARK and compliance changes and the sort of current state of that, it really goes from, leadership, creative, strategy, a lot of strategy. And one of the coolest things that I think we're doing, or at least I think it's cool, is we're having a startup fast pitch. So we're breaking off 45 minutes where 5 to 7 companies are going to get up there with 5 minutes and 5 slides. And they're true startups, right? Like pre-revenue, but really sort of novel ideas that we wanted to help bring to the forefront.
Mhm.
There's a lot more I'm forgetting, but I would encourage you to go to inboxexpo.com and look at the agenda. And of course, if you need a promo code, if you want to go, you know who to talk to.
Exactly. So, one thing I've noticed is that it's certain organizations, the sort of internal subject matter expert on email ends up also owning other forms of push, right? So they often end up also owning SMS, maybe browser-based push.
Hmm.
Um, maybe they even own a smartphone app push, right? Because these
Yep.
are all sort of common permission relationship environments. But the level of, let's say, the level of permission is very different, right? And or the level of relevance to delight the recipient is very different in those various areas. And this may be outside of your purview, and maybe it's sort of tangential enough, but I sort of feel like I always want to be able to delight the consumer or the recipient of any push notification, but I have to be particularly careful with SMS, depending on, to some extent, the demographics of the recipient, right?
Hmm.
Some people are, more happy to receive something, whereas other folks are like, oh, wow, that's completely irrelevant. And of course, politicians have somehow exempted themselves from all the other rules of
That's
relevance
right.
and permission within a lot of these push areas. So I'd love for you to pontificate on push outside of email and the level to which some best practices sort of apply to all of them, but in a different way.
Well, I'll say that I would defer to Adam, who runs our agency services, because he really has his finger on the pulse. However, um, what we have seen, and this is kind of reflected in like the email vendor ecosystem,
Right.
you know, there's like SAP's arm, like, I dare you to find the word email on their website. Although, presumably it's mostly email, but it's all about this sort of multi-channel orchestration.
Yeah.
That's back in popularity. But even with Mailchimp, it's email and SMS. Like these
Mhm.
two are sort of interlocked. But the journey most marketers have taken, and I do think they all had some heightened sensitivity around text, but it was on some level a replication
Mm.
of these things, or just sort of staggering messages. It wasn't necessarily strategic. But now we're seeing whereby, like you said, you could infer someone's age, or maybe they just choose their preferred channel, and they're really sort of leaning into that. Um, but I kind of think we're going to see a lot more mistakes before we get to, well, I think that the best practices needle on that is going to move a lot.
Mm.
Because even now, right, micro, or certainly SMBs are leveraging one of those other channels, whether it's in-app or browser or SMS. Um, and there's some learning to be done there already that we've seen with some of our clients even.
Yep. Yep. Any parting thoughts, things you're excited about for the next year within the industry, other than the event, obviously, which is top of mind, I'm sure. But as just far as like either things you're working on or things that you think are transformative for the industry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're working on some fun project. Our list hygiene product, Alfred at alfred.email, is really grown by leaps and bounds, and we're working on some pretty nifty things on the user experience side, kind of rethinking how you use it. Kind of maybe migrating away from the dashboard and sort of make it more of a natural process. But from a deliverability is where we largely focus. Is We're just happy actually that Google rolled out, Google and Gmail / Yahoo rolled out these minimum requirements for DMARK and lots of other requirements too. Just because, securing your email system is way more important than ever. I mean, it used to be like, oh, it's a nice to have. And actually, it was a box that you checked to maybe improve your deliverability a little bit. But we've seen so many companies victimized, and you would think, oh, that's good for business for us. Well, these more often than not, they're micro. They're real moms and pops. And, these are things that they can't afford. So they have to go in there and say, well, this is got to throw away that whole website now, or this whole email and start all over because of those restrictions. So I'm excited for when it gets to that, they start increasing that policy and enforcement of those policies so that people can truly be protected. It's worth it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing all your wisdom. A lot of great pearls of wisdom that came out there as a result of our conversation. And I look forward to keeping up with the next iterations of Alfred and your services as well.
Well, thanks again for the opportunity, Kevin. It's been a pleasure.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.